Most of you hearing this story won't believe it. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through the horror. To my knowledge, only 2 people have ever survived this hell and returned to Earth in one piece, and sadly, the other is no longer living. Despite being warned by government agents about the serious consequences of going public, I believe people need to know the truth. An intergalactic war is coming to our doorstep. Like most of their abduction victims, I wasn't special or important. I was at the lowest rung of society, a down and out who had lost my job, my home, and fallen victim to alcohol addiction, sleeping rough and filling my belly with cheap vodka to keep warm at night. My confession to having an alcohol problem might bring my account into question, but I assure you, I was quite sober when the events took place. On the night in question, I had taken refuge in an abandoned bus shelter along a lonely back road, falling asleep under the stars after emptying my bottle. I don't know when I was awoken, but I vividly remember my senses being overloaded. My ears ringing with a deafening, buzzing sound and my eyes temporarily blinded by an intense white light. Suddenly, I felt my body rising off the bench, being pulled upwards into the night sky. My last memory was of a dark, cigar-shaped aircraft above me, and to my horror, I realized I was being pulled towards it. Then I lost consciousness. Before we continue the video, please like this video and subscribe. Also, click the bell icon so you'll be the first to watch our next videos. Let's continue the video. My eyes closing as my world went dark. I awoke an indeterminable length of time later in a very alien place. The first thing I noticed was the pain throughout my body, a dull throbbing as my bones and joints ached. Then I felt the cold, discovering my body was completely naked. My clothes gone as I lay against cold metal, my skin freezing and my body shaking. It caused me physical pain to open my eyes, but when I did, I saw little. The steel-plated room was dark, only dimly lit by a faint red light. I panicked, quickly standing on my trembling legs and darting toward the wall. But suddenly, I experienced a shooting pain pulsating through my body, like being hit by a bolt of lightning. I screamed in agony, falling to the cold, hard floor, horrified to find a metal collar secured around my neck. In panic, I tore at the collar, trying to remove it, but was hit with another surge of electricity. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," called out a calm voice from the darkness. "The shock collar goes off if you make sudden movements or try to remove it. The voltage will increase until you either lose consciousness or your heart stops." Confused, angry, and fearful, I listened to the stranger, not wishing to endure that pain again. Slowly, I opened my dry lips and stuttered, "Who are you? And what the hell is this place?" "My name is Gideon and I am, like you, a prisoner here. Is there anyone else?" I asked cautiously. "Yes," came a voice. "I'm Tanya, and I don't know why I'm here." A pause, then another voice, trembling, said, "Max, I'm Max. I don't know why this is happening. I want to go home." "We all do," answered Gideon, "but that's not going to happen." I shook my head, imagining this must be a vivid nightmare, but in my heart, I knew it was real. "Where the hell are we? And who's done this to us?" I demanded. Gideon sneered before replying, "That's 2 questions, but I'll answer both. It's difficult to explain in words, so perhaps it's easier if I show you." He tapped on a hidden control panel, entering a code. A shutter slowly opened, revealing a scene that brought terror to my heart. We saw a transparent porthole-like window showing a dark sky adorned with distant stars and a blue and green globe we all recognized. I pulled myself up, ignoring the throbbing pain, and walked barefoot to the window. I scanned the familiar green continents, the blue oceans, and the shifting storm fronts. I realized I was looking down at Earth. This could only mean one thing. I was no longer on my home planet. The Earth's reflected light illuminated the room, a bare metal cell with few amenities other than a stinking hole in the ground as a toilet and hard concrete slabs as beds. I saw my fellow prisoners clearly for the first time. Tanya and Max were naked and humiliated, their eyes full of tears. They were in shock. I tried to maintain their dignity by focusing on their faces. Tanya was a slim, dark-haired, attractive young woman, showing signs of addiction with pasty skin, bloodshot eyes, and track marks on her arms. Max was an older man, flabby and wrinkled, with wide eyes indicating a psychological breakdown. Gideon was different. He wore a shock collar but was fully clothed in a white robe. Emaciated and sullen, he knew more about our situation than the rest of us. "How did you know about the shutter?" I demanded. Gideon held up his hands defensively. "I can explain everything. Just give me a chance." Max screamed angrily, "Yeah. How do we know you're not the one who did this to us?" In an instant, all three of us advanced on Gideon, fists clenched, ready to beat him. Gideon's eyes widened as he backed off, lifting his hands higher. "You shouldn't do that." "Screw you," I yelled, but a second later, I was on the floor, convulsing as the shock collar delivered another jolt. My companions were similarly incapacitated, rolling on the metal surface in agony. When our punishment was over, we glared up at Gideon, who looked down with a barely concealed smug satisfaction. "I did warn you." Slowly, painfully, we got up. Gideon addressed us. "As I've explained, I am a prisoner here like you. Our captors have allowed me certain privileges and access to information. Why, I cannot say, but I suspect it's part of their plan for me to explain the situation to new arrivals." My mind was racing, sweat pouring from my skin. None of this made any sense. "Who's done this to us?" asked Tanya, breaking the tense silence. "Who the hell is holding us, and where are we?" Gideon nodded. "Where we are should be obvious, although I understand it's a lot to take in. Nevertheless, we are clearly in space above our home planet. As to who's holding us, that's more difficult to explain. Our captors are not of this world. I assume they come from another star system in our galaxy, although from where exactly, I cannot say. They've shared little about their culture or civilization. I only know their technology is vastly superior to our own." "So, we've been abducted by aliens?" I exclaimed in shock. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Gideon confirmed grimly. Tanya interjected excitedly. "What, like anal probing and all that?" Max let out a nervous laugh, but Gideon's face remained stone-like. "I'm afraid it's far worse than that," he said solemnly. "They have no interest in human anatomy except for inflicting physical pain upon us." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Gideon didn't answer immediately, instead pointing towards the porthole. I turned to look, instantly sickened by what I saw. Human bodies floated through space past the window, their naked forms frozen in the cold vacuum. The first was a man, the second a woman, both showing signs of torture. Deep incisions, burn marks, digits sliced off, bulging bloodshot eyes filled with pain and terror. Most disturbingly, the tops of their heads were gone, their brains missing. We watched in shock as the bodies disappeared from sight, lost forever in space. "Sweet Jesus," I muttered, my whole body shaking. "The last batch," Gideon explained solemnly. "Our captors are finished with them. They murdered them, tortured them, and then dumped their bodies into space." "Why?" I forced the words out. "Why would they do this?" "That's the million-dollar question," Gideon answered cryptically. "I don't have all the answers, but I've been on this ship for a while. I've observed and had limited communication with our captors. From this, I've reached some conclusions. All living organisms are products of their environment, evolving traits to survive. Evolution is hard to shake. We humans consider ourselves advanced and civilized, but we are still prone to primal urges. Now, imagine a species evolving on a much more dangerous planet, an environment with many highly aggressive organisms. The evolutionary victor would need to be smarter, stronger, and more ruthless. In the quest for dominance, one species became more ruthless than its competitors, ensuring its place at the top. Millennia later, this species, now technologically advanced and capable of intergalactic space travel, encountered other similarly developed civilizations. Inevitably, conflicts arose, leading to terrible wars fought across star systems, resulting in countless deaths. Gideon paused briefly, looking out of the porthole toward our distant planet. We were all hanging on his every word, the implications of his tale both extraordinary and terrifying. Eventually, these wars ended in stalemate, as multiple civilizations fought each other to a bloody standstill. A new order emerged, a sort of galactic UN formed to keep the peace. The war was over, but our captors retained their predatory instincts, remnants of their violent evolution. So what did they do with these murderous urges? They came to places like Earth, an uncontacted backwater planet on the edge of the galaxy, beyond the laws of the Galactic Confederation. Here, they could kidnap with impunity, taking those who would not be missed and inflicting sadistic torments before brutally ending their lives. By such underhand methods, our captors indulged their dark impulses without risking war with their galactic rivals. I shook my head in dismay, my mind racing to make sense of this madness. In the end, it was Tanya who voiced what we were all thinking. So, you're saying these psychos are like space versions of Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer? They travel light years just to torture and murder people? Gideon frowned before replying, well, it's a bit more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, yes. I couldn't believe it. My exhausted brain told me this couldn't be true, and even if it was, there must be a way out. What do we do? I asked frantically. How do we get out of this hellhole? Gideon sighed loudly before replying, you don't. I'm afraid there is no escape from this ship, and there's no way you can avoid your fate. All of you will die here. Sadly, this is inevitable. I cried out in angry defiance. That can't be true. You survived. Why haven't they killed you? Our captors keep me alive because I serve their purposes for now, at least. I suspect they will kill me once I outlive my usefulness, or perhaps they're just saving me for last. In any case, I have accepted that I'll never leave this ship alive. Suddenly, all our attention was drawn to the corner of the cell, where Max had curled himself up in a fetal position, maniacally nodding his head back and forth as he muttered in a state of disconnected panic. No, this can't be happening. I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve this. A moment later, the far wall lit up as a previously hidden doorway appeared and slid open. They're coming to claim their first victim, Gideon warned, fear now evident in his voice. We all backed away from the doorway, trying to prepare ourselves for whatever monstrosity emerged from the other side. But Max had lost his mind, standing up and attempting to run for the door, screaming, "Let me out of here! I need out!" He moved quickly before any of us had time to react. What happened next was a violent blur in my memory. A long implement extended out of the darkness and struck Max hard on the head, knocking him backward and down to the metal floor. The creature that emerged from the shadows and entered our cell was something out of a nightmare. My descriptive skills are not good enough to do the alien being justice, but the best way I can describe its appearance is as a cross between a human and a lizard. The alien was about 7 feet tall, its body covered in smooth red scales, although it also wore some kind of body armor over its torso. Its snout-like mouth was filled with sharp teeth, and it had no nose, just 2 slits for nostrils. Its large, dark eyes were those of a reptile, cold, calculating, and predatory. Its arms were long, and I noted that it had opposable thumbs and digits, meaning it could hold and direct the pike-like weapon in its claws. Its legs looked powerful, and its middle toes were adorned with sharp curved claws about 6 inches long. It tapped these claws menacingly on the metal floor as it surveyed us, its naked and helpless human victims. At this point, Max unfortunately regained consciousness, glancing up at the beast above him and screaming out in absolute terror. I swore I could see a cruel smirk on what passed for the alien's lips, its eyes widening with sadistic pleasure as it lifted its weapon. A second later, Max's limp body was roughly dragged across the floor, his shock collar acting like a magnet attaching itself to the end of the alien's metal pike, allowing it to easily pull the kicking and screaming Max out of the cell and into the dark corridor beyond. A moment later, the door slammed shut, leaving a trail of Max's blood and urine on the floor and the rest of us trapped inside, dealing with the shock of what we'd witnessed. My God, what will they do with him? Tanya asked, her voice trembling. Trust me, you don't want to know, Gideon answered. I sat down in a corner, my head in my hands as I desperately tried to think. Surely there must be a way out, I thought. This couldn't be the end. But things only got worse over the next few hours. Clearly, our captors enjoyed tormenting us because, although the cell walls were thick, they deliberately piped in sound using some sort of speaker system. What we heard were the screams and pleas of our companion Max as he was subjected to unspeakable tortures. We heard every ignored cry for mercy, every incision made into his flesh, and a foul hissing sound that I can only assume was the reptilian alien's equivalent of laughter. Whenever we tried to plug our ears to block out the sound, we would get shocked from the collars. Our reactions to hearing this monstrous cacophony were different in each case. Tanya broke down, lying in a corner and sobbing uncontrollably, while Gideon stood and listened in grim silence, clearly having been through this hellish situation many times before. As for me, my mind was on the edge of madness, and I wanted to rip my ears off so that I didn't have to listen to Max's suffering. I kept racking my brain, trying to think of a way out and demanding answers from Gideon, but he didn't provide the answers I needed. The veteran prisoner seemed resigned to his fate. "We can fight them. Surely we can," I shouted. Gideon shook his head. "You are naked, unarmed, and have a shock collar attached to your neck. What's more, we are on board their spaceship, surrounded by dozens of armed guards and torturers. Resistance is entirely futile. Believe me, many have tried, and all have failed." "Well, can we reason with them then?" I asked desperately. "You're able to communicate with these aliens. Can't we make a deal?" Gideon scoffed at the suggestion. "Reason with them? Our captors regard us as no better than insects. They would no sooner negotiate with us than we would with a common housefly." "There must be something we can do," I cried out angrily, raising my voice to be heard over Max's screams. "We can't just sit here and wait for death." "Don't you think I would have done something already?" Gideon shouted, losing his temper for the first time. "Don't you realize I've considered every possible action?" "Stop it, both of you," Tanya screamed, raising her tear-covered face from her hands. Her angry words of rebuke ended our debate, and soon after, Max's tortured cries ended, replaced by a horrifying death rattle as he finally left the mortal coil. I shuddered upon hearing that awful sound. I felt some relief that Max's suffering had ended, but also fear because I knew one of us would be next. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the invisible door in the wall reopened, and the 7-foot-tall reptilian guard marched in, its foot claws clicking in excitement as its predatory eyes scanned the cell's interior in search of its next victim. I stood in defiance, clenching my fists as I faced the beast. I knew any physical resistance would be useless, but I still wanted to go down fighting. The alien's cold eyes ignored me, instead focusing on Tanya and lifting its weapon as it advanced upon her. I experienced a moment of foolhardy bravery then, as I charged toward the guard, screaming, "No! Don't take her! Take me instead!" The alien's reaction was instantaneous. It struck me with its pike, a shooting pain reverberating through my skull as I collapsed to the ground. With me out of the way, the alien guard continued its advance upon Tanya, who had taken cover in the far corner of the cell. It seemed inevitable that the beast would take her, but then all hell broke loose. There was an almighty explosion, and the whole spaceship shook, throwing us all across the cell like helpless ragdolls. This included the alien guard, who was flung heavily against the wall, its head cracking as it made impact. The alien didn't get back up. I didn't know whether it was dead or unconscious, but either way, we were happy for our unexpected salvation. In that moment, we all turned to the porthole, astonished to see a second craft soaring through space. A silver needle-shaped ship firing as it sped toward us, shooting missiles through the vacuum. There were more explosions as the prison ship we were on shook under the force of multiple impacts. While the ship continued to shake from explosions, we all felt hope. Rescue seemed like a miracle, but there was no time to doubt. I stood up, holding my throbbing head, and looked at Gideon, who seemed to regain his vigor. "We need to prepare," he said. "This might be our chance to escape." Behind the noise of explosions, we heard the sound of doors opening. I glanced through the small window of our cell and saw the beings who had captured us in disarray. It was evident they weren't prepared for such an attack. "They're coming for us," Tanya said, still trembling with fear, but now with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "If only we could find a way to open this cell," I said, desperate. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang outside our cell. An elderly person in gleaming armor entered. He was a rescuer. He approached us, holding a device that looked like a universal key. With a press, our cell opened. "Follow me," he commanded. "We're not safe here." We quickly followed, fear and hope mixing in our chests. The explosions continued as we navigated through the ship's corridors, seeing other prisoners being liberated by the rescuers. Finally, we reached a large hangar. The rescuers' ships were there, ready to escape. We boarded one of them and quickly took our seats, awaiting departure. "Is everyone here?" asked the rescuer who led us. We nodded, and he immediately instructed the pilot to take off. Within minutes, we left behind the ship of our captors, approaching safety. Outside the window, we saw the captor's ship exploding, gradually reduced to scraps of metal. "We're safe now," said the rescuer who assisted us, smiling. "We'll take you to our base, and from there, you can return to your homes." Tanya, Gideon, and I hugged each other, tears of joy streaming down our faces. Finally, after all the hardship and fear, we felt hope and safety. Days later, we reached the rescuers' base. They helped us return to Earth, to our families and friends. The memories of our capture and the cruelties we endured weren't easy to forget, but with the rescuers' help, we knew there was still hope amidst the darkness. And with each sunrise, we reminded ourselves that no matter how deep the scars of the past, there's always an opportunity for a new beginning.